And let me, and then I'll have Tim introduce himself. Linda has a meeting, ironically enough, with a textbook publishing company about some curriculum she's written. So I'm sorry you don't get to meet her, Amanda, but you'll get a chance to talk with her. And Tim is, I mean, I met Tim Pope in wanting to write some curriculum for a book that he had published. And truthfully, what grew out of that was the Global Math Story. So it was a really meaningful conversation. And Tim has been our board president. He's become one of my all-time great friends. And so I'm glad that he's able to join us as well. So
just glad you didn't use the phrase back in the day when I first.
Right. Yeah, I know it's becoming when we both could run and
yeah, so, I still run.
You do still run. And then Amanda's here because really one of our big projects is to work on curriculum with them. And I thought, Amanda, if you had got a chance to read through the text, I thought this might be very helpful for you, just to sort of frame. And to me, it almost, and in fact, one of the questions I wrote was, let's talk about what our next steps are, almost with you in mind. So that was the thinking. And you'll have 3 members of our team, and then Sara Moore will be joining us as well. And Sarah's just a real genius. She's got a PhD in mathematics education and works for Origo, which is the company that publishes curriculum, and was sort of a big deal in a company that produced all the manipulatives, many of which you have, called Cuisenaire, or not Cuisenaire, but Hand to Mind. They do produce the Cuisenaire bots. So, and now I'm nervous about these things because Tim knows this stuff so well still.
Okay, I did secondary, so my knowledge of the names of all the manipulatives, like, yeah, you don't quiz me on these things. Hi, I'm Tim.
This is Tim Pope. Now, Tim, Alex, you've met Tim before?
I don't think we've met, but I've heard his name in so many like T2T related things that I feel like I know about you. It's not Tim Pope. I've heard this name.
Good. Yes,
I think your paths may have crossed at NCTM in California.
I was wondering that too.
Yes.
If that's possible. That's okay.
Good.
I have the last year is my first. Well, now the virtual NCTM was the first one I'd missed in like 15 years.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, you've been a fixture there. Okay, let's just make it formal. So, Tim, can you just quickly introduce yourself and let us all know why we should listen to anything you might say?
I'm Tim. My current job, I have had lots of titles in my world, but I think I have the most powerful title now. I'm a high school math teacher. That's what I do. I teach 10th and 11th graders here in Bogota. Before then, the reason why Chad didn't ask me to do this because I'm a high school math teacher. But before then, I was in publishing, so I published the curriculum Chad and I worked with years. Was called the Discovering Math series, which was really one of the first math series to really embrace this idea of high leverage tasks, of inquiry-based learning, which, believe it or not, was not the reason those books were written. The books were written because when they first came out, they got an NSF grant because there wasn't any curriculum out at the time that really used graphing technology, calculators, and math technology. So they got their money to write books that use technology. How do I integrate technology into mathematics? Way back in the early 90s. Way back in the early 90s. God, that makes me feel old. Anyway. But then it really became sort of a leader, and I fell in love with the curriculum. I mean, part of the reason I picked the school I'm at, was the chance to come move to Bogota, which is a beautiful city with beautiful people, and we love it here. But also because I met the school because they used the books I published. So it impressed the parents when I say, look at the first page of your book, there's my name. And they think it's really cool. And they don't give me crap. So this is all good. Anyway, so I've been in publishing and building curriculum really looking at the principles and standards and like, how do we create curriculum? Because the reality is, teachers have a full-time job. Like, I'm a very busy guy now, just trying to connect to minors on a regular basis, and to have a set of instructional materials that you can trust, that will get you where you need to go. Just, I mean, that's like, I couldn't imagine doing the job I'm doing if I didn't have a curriculum I can just trust and know that, hey, I can teach what's in the program, use those materials, and I'll be meeting my students' needs in an equitable and rigorous way. I don't know how to do it without that, which is why I'm a big believer in the power of how do you build it. And the last piece is teachers are not curriculum designers. Nowhere in teacher school do you learn how to design curriculum. It's not a course. It's not what's taught. Teachers feel they need to do it because either they're somewhere where it doesn't exist, and so they're making it up on their own as they go, and it's by requirement. Secondary teachers are worse than elementary teachers usually at this, that they think they know better, and so they can write curriculum because we're arrogant SOBs, and we think that we can just tell everybody what to do, but we're not, and I'm not, and I publish for a living, and I know that the books I use, like, it was written by a team of brilliant people, all with more mathematics backgrounds than I have, and reviewed and edited. And there's no way simple little me is going to come up with anything of that caliber. And so I've come to depend on it. Anyway, that went from introduction into me getting on a soapbox about.
I know you surely did.
Sorry, Chad.
I'm so glad. Thank you for doing that, Tim. I will send you the kudos afterwards, because that's exactly the point I've made. In fact, when I taught, I tried to use the curriculum at the school, and I realized I didn't want to spend 3 or 4 hours trying to put together something at night every night. So I bought the school. I'm lucky I could a set of textbooks just so I could use the Discovering series. It's really outstanding, and I think I've mentioned it to you, Amanda, because it could become not the books we use, obviously, but an idea, a guideline. It'd be so cool to have those kinds of books for elementary. Amanda, can you introduce yourself quickly? I know you probably met Allie and most of our team, but just so Tim knows you, and Callie, so I can introduce you all.
Sure, thank you. I've actually met Callie before.
Oh, good.
I was in one of your workshops
Right.
a few years back with Teachers to Teachers in Antigua. I'm Amanda, and I'm really happy to be here with you all right now. Although, as Chad knows, I do have like a weird relationship with math. It's not my favorite. I kind of go like, oh man, I'm going to be talking about math curriculum and returning back to like my junior high and high school days of not really liking math. I am a big fan of the humanities and literature and writing and art. And I am actually very, very grateful to Teachers, who has been partnering with a small organization, foundation / school / learning center in Santiago Atitlan, which is called La Puerta Abierta, that I founded about 13, 14 years ago. So the school has been growing. And every year, with the exception of a few years, we've been able to add on another grade. And just last year, we had our first 6th grade graduation,
Nice.
completing the cycle of, thank you, preschool through 6th grade. So that's who I am. I have also been very interested in creating some type of a curriculum for the Puerta Abierta. And I think somewhat naively, perhaps 2 or 3 years ago, I didn't think it would be an easy process, but I thought it would be maybe a fairly easy process for people who liked math. So that's when we were talking with Meredith College, like, hey, do you think you could just whip up a math curriculum for us at the Puerta Abierta so that we can all be, moving forward together at our school? And I also remember talking to Alex about that, and Alex was kind of like, oh gosh, this is not easy, right? And I'm understanding that now. And yet I understand also how important it is for us at our school to have something to guide us, because traditionally what happens is that students receive a plethora of information in each grade, but it's not really connected. And so we don't really know if we're linking what a child learned in the year prior to what's coming next and what our end goals are. And as those of you who have experience working in Guatemala, you're aware that the education is very like top heavy, I guess, or like a lot of information is gathered even at an early age, without having a very strong foundation of concepts for our students. So
Nice. Well
that's a
said.
bit of who I am and why I am excited to be here.
Thank you.
Yeah, I learned the hard way. It was very humbling as someone who was a high school math teacher and administrator, went into publishing, and then ended up at a company that did do an elementary curriculum, how profoundly complex elementary math curriculum is. Because you would think the mathematics, like it's adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. We all do that. But the complexity of how that thinking progresses and how you help a 4-year-old and how do you introduce something to a 4-year-old so that that conceptual sense of number, that conceptual sense of arithmetic, of operation continues to develop. I mean, Sara, when she gets on, will be much more articulate than I'm being right now about it, because the woman's done it for decades. But like it just blows me away. Like it's not nearly as to do it right, which means to make sure that you're appreciating that progression and how children develop those cognitive abilities, so that you are reaching everyone. Because traditionally in mathematics, there's the kids who are good at math and the kids that aren't. And because some kids learn fine, give them an example, show them problems, and they figure it out. But a lot of kids aren't. And if you develop curriculum in a way that acknowledges, like, where am I at conceptually and how can I connect those dots and not ask kids to make the jumps, then you grab more students and you create a more equitable environment. And that's tough flipping work.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yep. I completely agree. And Amanda, I'm working on this project in Malawi and also Zambia, not Zambia, but another one of the countries down there. I'm just drawing a blank for some reason. That has to do with storybooks, just typical storybooks and where the math is. And I want to talk with you about it because I think it'd be powerful for you. And I'm excited for Sara to get on and get to meet you all. But let's just take this as the starting point, because I think too often we hear the word curriculum and we just think that's everything that had to do with what happens in the math classroom. And it doesn't. I think I like that the authors really make a distinction between curriculum and standards. And so the first thing I'm wondering is, what do those mean? And, ideally, like, if, they're only, well, like, so Tim, Amanda, can you join our team and just sort of feel free to answer these questions as you want? Same with Alex and Fatima and Ali and Callie, and then Tim and I will guide, or mostly Tim. So what is the distinction between those two?
This is me being quiet as the white man so that other people can speak before I once again get on my soapbox.
Thank you.
What I understood is that the standards are what we're hoping to accomplish with our students, so the goals, and the curriculum is the means to achieve the standards.
I just want to ask a question. I'm not, Amanda, so does the Guatemalan, the education ministry provide you, like, this is what students should be able to do mathematically at the end of each grade, or do you make that up yourself? Like, how do you determine the goals for your students?
Right. So I can give you like my feedback on that. Alex and Fatima can chime in as well, because our school breaks a lot of rules. There is like a national curriculum with standards, right? That yes, that in this grade, this is what children should learn. We at the Puerta Abierta try to make sure that children in that grade level are receiving that knowledge, but the way that we do it is different. There's also a curriculum as well, but we don't follow the Guatemalan curriculum. I don't know if Alex or Fatima want to add some more to that.
Yeah, so yes, the national curriculum, as Amanda said, that's used across the country, it just has the standards that are laid out and then what you should be learning in each grade, just like she said. And there are different ways that different schools, like different textbooks, different curriculums, like different things that people use to get there, depending on like the type of school, right? If it's like a public, private, NGO, international school, like there's lots of, I guess, like different compilations of curriculums that get them to those standards.
The way I perceive it is those standards are also pretty pie in the sky. It's like students will be able to differentiate an equation by 10th grade, which is, or
Oh, wow.
division. I mean, if they're pretty high standards, would you guys agree? Or are they more realistic than obtainable?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if we're looking at like where it is that they're supposed to be able to get to at the end of this Guatemalan curriculum, if we look at the one public university that is in the country, the entrance exam that's like aligned to this curriculum is a very hard entrance exam. And so if you look at it and you're comparing it to like what the Common Core equivalent would be in the States, you are looking at like the level it's high, it's very high. And it's like, oh, we've already seen these differentiated equations in Diversificado. But I would say what is on paper is what the curriculum is versus what actually happens in the classroom is also like very, very, very different for like 90% of the country is the other piece of that, I think.
Right. So I just to add to that, I don't know, Tim, what the education system looks like in Colombia, but in Guatemala, there are a lot of ideas that are presented but are not enforced, like in all levels of the country and society. So that means that most people who even go on to college probably still haven't mastered very basic math concepts, which is something that like we work with teachers to make sure that our teachers understand what they're supposed to be teaching to their children. But many people make it through the system, which I guess is a sign that it's not really working, because even if there is a curriculum and there are standards, they're not being evaluated to be sure that people have mastered what they need to know to go on to the next level.
I mean, we have a similar struggle here in Colombia with the expectations for going to, like you said, Alex, going to this public university and what's expected to be covered. I mean, I sat in a meeting today because if you want to go to a state university, you have to take calculus in high school. We deal with, I mean, I teach at hoity-toity private school, and we deal with lots of students who are cognitively struggle to get there. And so I just had a meeting today to figure out how, but let me ask a follow-up question that would intrigue me. And Amanda, maybe you and your team haven't thought about this, since you guys are the rebels, which I love and appreciate. Have you guys ever thought about it through the lens of, like you said, you did your first grade 6 graduation last year. In terms of mathematically, what you want those 6th graders to be able to do when they leave your school? Like, I don't know if you've ever looked at it through that lens, but if you have, I'd be curious to hear what you think.
I think that's a brilliant question. I don't think that we actually have ever done that. So I think that that's something that would be really helpful for us to discuss as like a community of teachers or parents, students, perhaps even. And I know that that kind of comes up in some of the questions that we had to think about prior to this, right? But just thinking about what is relevant to our community. So I think that's a great question. Yes. I mean, I could give you what I believe, but I wouldn't be able to say that we've done this collectively.
And parents would be an interesting perspective, because not in terms of just like, I want my children to be able to move along division, but I mean, to be more pragmatic. I want my children to be able to make group purchases at the local market. I mean, I'm trying to come up with a good example and I'm going to stink at it. But I think you get my point. It's not less about like looking at a set of national standards which are very technical and specific to mathematics, but more in terms of mathematically thinking, like what are the things that we want our children to do to be successful in our community? I think that was the way you phrased one of your questions there, Chad, right. Or whoever wrote this document. I don't want to give Chad credit if he doesn't deserve it. I usually don't want to give Chad credit for anything, but it's either Ali or it's his wife every time. I'm just saying. I've known him for a long time. I say that with a fair amount of certainty. Anyway, to be successful, what do they need to be able to do mathematically?
Yep.
And the struggle with that is sometimes parents, because they never think about it that way. I mean, every human being thinks mathematically, but unless you're an educator, you don't always often think like, oh, I just thought mathematically when I thought about how much money I had to take to the market to get 5 pounds of flour.
Right.
But anyway, it'd be an interesting conversation to structure.
Well, it is. That's the first question, right? In some ways, and really frames this. I mean, can we actually even do a curriculum if we don't have standards? That's a meaningful curriculum. I can create tasks, but I'm not sure I can actually put together a curriculum.
You're going to have standards de facto, because when you build your curriculum, you're going to build it based on some sense of, you're going to do it without doing it thoughtfully. You're going to just think it's like, all right, well, yeah, you do this, you do 2-digit addition, and then we should do 3-digit addition. And
Right.
you have, so I would posit that you do it, you're going to do it anyway when you make your curriculum, but what the document is proposing is that you thoughtfully do that ahead of time. Like, exactly what do I want to accomplish? And then you build or find instructional materials that meet those needs. I mean, that's why in the States, there's that nonprofit Ed Reports. There's a nonprofit, so there's a nonprofit in the States, and what they do is based on the Common Core, the standards that most states in the US use. They go through the effort of going through all the curriculum and saying, all right, based on this is what you want your children to accomplish, these materials will get you there. So the standard should come first, because otherwise you're gonna do it anyway.
Do you guys agree with that, everyone? Alex, Fatima, what I'm curious is, when you were teaching, do you feel like you had a really solid set of standards that was guiding instruction, or are you just trying to teach what you felt like the students needed to learn?
Fátima, la pregunta es si cuando tú estabas dando clase, si tú sentiste que tenías estándares muy claros que te ayudan a saber qué tienen que aprender tus alumnos, o si tú tenías que como elegir qué fue lo que ellos tenían que aprender tú, o sea, sin tener estándares muy claros.
Era como muy complicado porque sé que el currículum tiene estándares. Sin embargo, no es como muy claro cuáles de los 8 estándares que por lo general maneja van a ir como en cada contenido, o en cada competencia, o en cada indicador. Entonces, por lo general, era como, mejor me trazaba metas, porque los estándares eran como muy alejados, y muchas veces tenían, por ejemplo, te decía en su diario vivir, bueno, yo no voy a estar todos los días atrás del niño, entonces no voy a saber si mi estándar o a lo que quiere llegar lo voy a cumplir, porque cuando esté de noche en su casa y tenga algún problema, no voy a saber si lo logró, y si mi estándar entonces está dentro del rango de lo que estoy pidiendo o lo que se pide.
Okay, I can do my best to try to translate that, but there's a lot there. Okay, so that yes, she had clear the standards that she had to teach to, but because of the way that the curriculum is organized and the way that each standard has, like, it's different. Like in the national curriculum, it's like you have the competencies, you have the standard itself, the competency, the indicator for if they reach that standard, and it's not necessarily clear, like in the 8 standards that are typically that you're looking at, like where each of these pieces is going to fit in, and then how do you also measure if they've reached, if they like have hit the indicator for this standard, and like how that all fits together. And so yes, like she has clear what this, or the answer would be like, yes, she does have clear what the standards are that she had to reach, but the piece of like, how do you get there and how does it all fit together is the really complicated bit.
Yes, right.
And if anyone else has anything else to add that they heard in Spanish, feel free. I'm like going to try my best to catch it all, but ¿y qué más?
Incluso, sí, hay centros educativos que no saben que hay estándares en el currículum. Entonces es como tu propia población no conoce al fondo el currículum. Entonces ahí está como la primera limitante o la primera deficiencia que uno nota, que muchas veces está, pero no sabemos usar nada de lo que está en el CNB. Mucho menos sabemos cómo utilizar los estándares.
So the other challenge is that like many teachers in schools like don't even know what the standards are. Like, yes, the curriculum exists, but actually knowing what the standards are in the curriculum, being able to identify them, and then also like use those in your teaching is not something that everyone has learned how to do.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of schools where that, like, it exists, but how to get that into a classroom or how to have a teacher actually use that is like a big piece that is missing.
Mhm. I think what I'm excited about working with Amanda, if this project happens, is that we could sort of cut through all that sort of confusion and really work with the teachers to establish local standards. And then hopefully have a coach who's helping the teachers implement the curriculum that we either align and adapt or actually try to create a little bit ourselves for the project. And I think that could be exciting personally. But we have to have standards, and I think that's the first bit. I love, Amanda, what you're saying about talking to parents and bringing them in. And Tim knows this too. There's lots of curriculum in the US that is really groundbreaking, and it fails because parents aren't on board. And if the parents aren't on board, then it's just not going to work. So let me ask this next question then. What is the role of culture in determining curriculum and standards? And I want to hear just first, and then I have some extensions, because I think you can follow both ways. You might sometimes have to create standards that are independent of culture. What do you guys think?
I mean, I can speak to what's true here.
Yeah, what is it in there? Yeah, for you, especially in that hoity-toity
So
school.
yeah, well, hoity-toity school, that still has to require, we still have to teach about 40% of our students aspire to go into a Colombian university, so we're tied to the Colombian standards. And I'm going to tread into waters of which I'm not that expert, and just now doing reading of my own. But the standards are incredibly European. Like, the standards were written here. They weren't written by white people, but there are standards that European people originally wrote. Like, this is what you need to know to be successful in university mathematics. They were written by university people, with the focus was not the questions I was asking earlier about what do you want kids to be able to do, students to be able to do to be successful in their community. They were written around this idea of what do you need to do so that you can get a math degree, which is still very much based on what European universities, American universities assume are covered in mathematics. And so that becomes this hard place because they tend to be very abstract because Europeans, that's a European way to think about mathematics, very abstractly, very much. We like lots of letters, we like lots of symbols, we like lots of Greek letters because that makes us feel even smarter in our math. And it doesn't, so there is no, at least in the standards here, there is no sense of enculturation in the standards. Now, there are teachers here who do their best to try, just as Amanda is sharing what you're doing with your school, they try to do their best to work around that and make it relevant to the students, but the standards don't appreciate culture, at least here, in any way, shape, or form.
What do you guys think, Callie and Alex and Fatima, working sort of in the schools, and what are you seeing with regard to the way culture is woven into the standards? I'm particularly thinking of, and Alex, you go ahead and respond first, and then I'll ask Callie a question, because.
I mean, so I similarly started my education experience in Guatemala in like a hoity-toity private school. So like I definitely have seen that side as well that you're speaking to, Tim, which is the piece that's like the national curriculum of Guatemala in that space, along with like super gringoized standards of like we want them to also be able to go to schools that are in the United States or in Europe or have other options outside of Guatemala, but then also needing to have the students reach the standards that are for Guatemalan universities. So it's like that mixed too. And then I also had the opportunity to do this, to create a curriculum for a school that was right across the lake from where Amanda is teaching, that also was looking at how do we align this with what is relevant for our girls in our community that was like all Indigenous girls. And so this question makes me think about like how like different those experiences are too, because then you also have like, I would say that the Guatemalan curriculum is similarly just reflecting education in like a very different lens than what makes sense for a lot of the Guatemalan population. There's like pieces of it that are like Mayan numbers that I feel are kind of thrown in there as this like sprinkle of, oh yes, we're paying attention to this, but it's very much like, yeah, just to check the box. So I think that is more of like a facade of like, oh, we're considering the culture in this. And then I think there are also other pieces here where it's like, there's another school that that is in Chahul, which is like another part of the country that's pretty remote, and they're trying to build their school right now based off of the same idea, like, or students probably likely are not going to be going outside of Guatemala or maybe even to the city, but what is it that they need in order to be successful in their community? What is the math that they need? Which I think is tricky, because then you have like, you know, you don't want to have like low standards for your students, and then they also are trying to make it as relevant as possible for the community for it to make sense for parents to say like, oh yeah, I'm going to send my kid to this school that has a different idea about what education is, instead of them like going to work in the community. So it's like also that piece of like the parents seeing the relevance in it, I think is also really tricky, because we would see that also around the lake. And like Amanda, maybe with the population that you guys are working with, you see it as well. But I think it's something that I find tricky, because again, it's like you don't want to lower standards, but you also, there is this piece of like, it has to be relevant for the population that you're working with. And if the parents are seeing it already as a very big sacrifice for their student to be going to school and not entering the workforce early, then that I think enters into the conversation as well, when you're thinking about, well, what is it that your kid is going to have at the end of his experience that's going to make you feel like that's enough? And then maybe there's other piece of what the student wants. So I think there's a lot of things there that this question makes me think about that are super complicated but are relevant.
So Steve Rasmussen says, math is uniquely difficult to teach. It's hard to teach it in general, but then what you teach is hard for that very reason, I think. Callie, I'm thinking about Ozle. Oh, Fatima, you were going to say something. Go ahead, Fatima.
Sí, perdón, que iba a decir que es similar a lo que dijo Alex, pero hace poco pasó algo como que a mí me llamó mucho la atención. Justo pasó aquí en el pueblo, ¿verdad? Aquí en San Antonio. Y es que fueron a inscribir a una niña a la escuela, pero cabe aquí, ¿verdad? Lo de la cultura. A la niña le iban a dar una beca de estudios, donde le iban a apoyar con alimentos, recursos, todo, ¿verdad? Incluía la beca. Pero como no tenían como muy claras los objetivos, la mamá le dio mucho miedo y empezó como a pensar que de repente es tráfico de niñas, o qué le van a hacer a mi hija, van a poner como, van a hacer otras cosas con mi hija. Entonces, la misma cultura o las mismas personas de tu pueblo vienen y te meten como ese tope o ese freno, que es como al final es como muy complicado. Tú cuando te das cuenta de algo y quieres decirles no, o sea, le están dando una oportunidad, usted debe aprovecharla, las personas como que se cierran, porque es como el papel de la cultura, ¿verdad? Cómo, hasta qué punto llega y te puede cambiar. Tú puedes tener muchas ideas, pero primero es como romper con la cultura que ya viene para poder dar paso a lo que uno quiere implementar. Y lo siento, Alex, creo que fue mucho.
No, sí, voy a hacer lo mejor que pueda. So Fatima is sharing that like recently, like around, like in her, ¿es en tu comunidad o solo es como una historia que escuchaste en algún lado?
No, es aquí porque fue.
Es en San Antonio. Va.
Sí, es aquí en San Antonio.
Okay. So in Fatima's community, that recently there was like a girl who was offered a scholarship to study at a school, but the school didn't have like super clear the objectives, and the parents didn't either. And so then that same culture of like being concerned about having even like a girl studying, and that kind of like fear about, oh, this might be like, what if it's trafficking of girls? What other things might be going on? Maybe the school isn't doing what they're saying they're going to do. Like all of these other things, like the unfamiliarity comes into play. And then instead of seeing it just as that, like something that seems so obvious, I think maybe in like a more Western culture, it's like, oh yeah, it's just, you're just studying, like there's nothing beyond that. There are other pieces of culture that have to be taken into consideration, that it's not that easy. You have to like get past that first step of the culture around what is it to study, what is the scholarship, what are they going to come out of this experience with? Yep. Like that's something, like you might have all the ideas, but it doesn't mean anything if you can't like get past that first step of the cultural, like, I don't want to say obstacle, but just like taking the culture into consideration
Lens,
when
yes.
you are looking at, yes, that what this means. It's not as simple as just a scholarship to a
Right.
school and how great and our daughter's going to go there. Like there's way
Right.
more to it than that.
Right. So Sarah, we're literally just starting, and we're talking about. So welcome, Sarah Moore. You guys, and we're not going to stop everything and make an obstacle, like introduce herself. But I've already introduced you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Yes.
We won't say what he said, but he did introduce you.
You can tell me later, Tim.
But we're really talking now about, if you have standards, what's the role of culture in the standards? And I hear from you all, and is that let's be sure to be aware of the local standards, what the local goals are in the local culture, and is an objective to be able to go to the market and understand how to make the best deal, or how I might open my own store, and what kind of math and addition and subtraction I need to know for that. And I think, yes, but what about this idea that we are becoming more and more connected as a globe? And maybe students that are graduating from Amanda School in 10 years are going to need to know how to do computer sciences, because they're the people that we go to for coding, or that we go for web design. I mean, wouldn't it be great to have a center where people are doing web design in Santiago Titlán, and people are making some real money there? That might be worthwhile. So how do we balance the two? Is that important? First of all, do we want to balance the two? Amanda, what do you think? Do you want to balance the two, or do you go, I want my kids just to graduate and be able to survive in this community first?
I think it's such a provocative question, and a really good one. I obviously think that taking culture into consideration is really important. And I also agree with Fatima's side of sometimes culture, especially culture that's rooted in tradition, might be resistant to something that's different because it's unfamiliar, right? And I think that the Puerta Abierta is a really good testimony to that. And when we opened, it was very uncertain if our families, if the community would be a different way of education. And there's no recipe for that, but I think that obviously having been invested in the community prior to coming and saying, like, this is what we're going to do, we're going to open an alternative school in Santiago, was very important. And in Fatima's example or testimony, I think that perhaps if there was more parent education involved in saying, this is what the school is about, and this is what the girls are going to be learning, and this is why it's important, tanto for the students as also for the parents, that would have been a key component. But as you were saying, Chad, I think that, one of the things that we really instill in our students at the Puerta Abierta and their families is to dream, and to not feel limited. And so I think that our future students, that will go on into junior high and high school, will probably, many of them end up at the university. And so we also need to make sure that our students that are in the Puerta Abierta, that are rural, have the skills to make good math decisions and that are useful in their lives for everyday transactions, but also that they are able to compete with other students who are receiving a more traditional national curriculum. So I think it needs, like you use the word balance. I think it needs to be a balance. And if there are ways when both can meet, like maybe you're teaching like a more traditional concept, traditional meaning like standard, I guess, but incorporating cultural relevance into it, that would be ideal.
Yeah.
I think you make a really important point there, which is regardless of where it's coming from, the community has to own it and want it. So like 2 examples. So at my first school I taught at was in urban Dallas, mostly African-American and Mexican-American students. They had all sorts of struggles, the parents did, with how to support their children in learning, but they all valued it. They knew what was going on at school was a good thing. And so there was like, what do I need to do for my child to be successful? Fast forward 2 years, I'm a principal on the Navajo reservation. The Navajo people couldn't give a rat's behind about traditional European American schooling. It meant nothing to them. It meant nothing to their community. And so there was no support there, and we weren't successful because they didn't own that sense of this is something that is a good thing for our people, for our community. So, I mean, yes, like the idea of bringing coding or whatever into a community to bring economic life to that community, that's fine. It comes from the outside, but the community has to own it and say, this is something I want. We want this opportunity for our community, for our people.
Mhm. Right. That's great. So yes. Interesting. So one of the things that I'm hearing then is really if we sort of create a cookbook of what we might want to be doing, we need to establish what the standards are going to be in partnership with the community, but also with regard to the world at large, so that our students aren't going off in some direction. If Linda Gojak were here, and she can't be here today, unfortunately, she would say, I know I've heard her say this 100 times, math is math in some ways, and you have to you learn one thing after another. So I'm not going to teach you how to add fractions until you understand what a fraction is. And so those things the progression is still there. That's sort of almost culturally independent, but how those things are taught, which is sort of what I heard you propose, Amanda, might be culturally relevant. Let's set the example in my local community or globally too. I think it's also important for your students to have an understanding of the African plains and the way people live in Europe and other places like that. I don't want to use Europe. I'm sure they have plenty of examples. The world is Eurocentric. So let's say we have the sort of set of guidelines. One thing that I thought that was important in this chapter is the teachers play an important role. And so from my experience, some of the teachers that I've worked with haven't really talked about lesson planning much. And I think, can you even deliver a curriculum if you don't lesson plan for it or unit plan?
Okay, those are two very different questions.
Okay, well, tell me about that. How's that, Tim?
Well, I mean, because when you say unit planning, then you're talking about, yes, that goes back to your connection with the standards. What am I trying to accomplish? What are my learning goals? What's the progression? Right. How am I making sure I'm making those points? Lesson plans is, what am I going to do tomorrow? I'm going to have these students in front of me for an hour tomorrow. What am I going to do for that hour?
Right.
I mean, others may disagree. To me, those are two very different questions, and I would give you two very different answers.
Mm-hmm.
I think you have to think about them separately, Tim. You're right. Because the unit planning is, in many ways, the level where that community connection is going to come in, where that idea of what am I showing, using this as an opportunity to show students about the broader world than where they are today,
mm-hmm.
in whatever that might, whatever that might look like, both those branching out and coming in lenses. And if you don't have that big picture, you can't do the what am I going to do tomorrow with any power.
Right.
So part of what I think I would add on to what Tim said is that you have to think at the level of the unit first.
Mm-hmm.
What am I going to do over the next few weeks, say,
Mm-hmm.
although the scale of a unit can obviously vary. What's the next chunk of content I want to talk about?
Mm-hmm.
And what does success look like? And that's our big thing. Yeah. Like I just had one of my regular meetings with a colleague. We teach the same course, and we were planning our next unit together. And it was like, all right, and then what does success look like as part of that process? Versus on the lesson plans, like, I mean, this goes back to what I said at the beginning of this deal. Like, I have a curriculum I trust. It tells me, like, all right, here's how you're going to launch your lesson. Here's what you're going to do next. I mean, it's all right here. I just sort of follow along.
And that's what we want for you, Amanda, I think, something like that in some ways, right? So, and that's the point. I think that we need to teach the teachers how to unit plan collaboratively. I'm hearing both Sara and Tim say that's something that you would do probably collaboratively. And then lesson plan would be ideally collaborative as well sometimes, but maybe not.
Well, it's collaborative horizontally and vertically. Sarah, I told them before you got on that I would talk and then you would say everything smarter and more profoundly than I did. So feel free. But I mean, so there's two different conversations I had today, just today, actually. It was one with my colleague who teaches the same course, but then we had another meeting, which is less often, but still as important, where we talked to the teacher who teaches the course below us and the teacher who's going to get these kids next year. And we talked about what are our goals and what do you need us to accomplish so that kids are ready for the next year? Because you all know how this works, right? High school teachers blame middle school teachers blame elementary teachers blame parents, and parents blame the in-laws. That's how this usually works. So the only way you solve that, I don't know if that joke translates culturally, but it's funny to me. The only way you do it is that you have to have that planning conversation, both making sure, are we teaching the same thing? What does mastery look like? But then also, how do we make sure that we know where kids are coming, what they're coming to us from, and how do we make sure they're prepared for where they're going next?
Mm-hmm. Callie, I heard you. Wait, no, Callie, you were going to say, I saw you unmute. Did you have something you were going to add?
Yes, kind of in thinking about everything that that we've been talking about, and like the unit plan versus a lesson plan, and now my dog's gonna start barking.
Awesome.
But also considering like standards versus what does curriculum actually mean, and thinking about and also how does culture play a role into all of that. And I hear and understand to some degree that in high school, it's pretty different from an elementary school. And in elementary school, like my experiences with my deepest experiences with the Common Core standards, and I really love the Common Core standards for elementary school because I think they really build to critical thinking. And so, I think where they can fall short of that is when teachers don't have a deep understanding of what they're really trying to get to. And so then it becomes like these strategies become the new algorithm, and I force them on my students and force them to do these steps at this time in this way, instead of it being about the goals. Because I think also like what the standards do not dictate is the how. And so in the how, that's really where the culture is coming out. That's where we're connecting. Okay, here is the thinking skill. Now, my job as a teacher or a curriculum's job is to bring that to life for the students and school community. And so I think like, yes, while for elementary schools specifically, like, yes, while the culture might influence what might be learned, the culture is more so influencing how is it learned and how does that connect to the world that we're in. My experience for the most part teaching fourth grade math, with the exception of like long division, everything that my students did were things that were very connected to their real life, and with and even with long division, they like need that too, but there's just so many other tools to be able to get the answers, and so like thinking about the standards. And my school that I first taught in, like my first year, our principal, if you asked her, what curriculum does the school use, she would say the Common Core state standards. Well, that wasn't a curriculum. And then the state took over our school. And then we had this team that did like unpacking of the standards to try to develop a curriculum. And we really looked at, okay, here's what the standard says. Now, what do students have to know, understand, and do? And we really worked on drawing that out to say, here's the goal, but what does that actually mean? And so that's the piece that really like comes to life in unit planning. Like, what does that actually mean? And then how do we make that meaningful for kids? And then the lesson plan comes with, now, how are we going to get students there? Where are they? And how do we move them to this critical thinking in a way that's meaningful to their current lives and their future lives as well? And that builds up to, whatever higher level math that they might need for whatever the future might hold for them, if that's university or a career or, anything there. So I really think about elementary as this foundation, with critical thinking and problem solving being the end goal. And then like, what goes into that. that's kind of how I think about it, all tied together.
What I like about what you raised, Callie, is you raised the perspective, the issue of teacher knowledge.
Mhm.
Because especially in elementary grades, for the teachers to really feel confident of the mathematics so they can set those, what does success look like, criteria for a module, and so that they know enough of the mathematics beyond what they're teaching to know where they're going. Why is it important not to drill down into the weeds of long division in third grade when you first start teaching division? What are you trying to establish there about what division means so that some of that will hold as you start dividing fractions, and long division doesn't work anymore, but it's still dividing. And so I think layering that idea of what do teachers know and how do we build that into both the horizontal and the vertical conversations Tim was talking about is really important.
Yeah. So sometimes I need to pause and get my head around all these things you guys say, really fantastic things. And so just to go backwards from starting, like as the most recent thing I heard, a challenge that I see, and you know, like Amanda and Alex, I mean, each Callie, you guys all work in these spaces, are the teachers that we're working with maybe don't have that deep knowledge. I mean, that's the case in the US, but it's a different kind of lack of knowledge. And I think one thing that we want to think about is, can we produce something that the teachers can learn along with their students for a while? And then, you know, third time through, I mean, I have to say, using the books that Tim was talking about with algebra, I learned algebra in a way that I never thought I could learn it. And it blows me away still. Third time through, I was an expert at it. But that's something I think we need to think about. Is that possible?
I think it's possible, but the good news is, especially for elementary, for Amanda's situation, you're talking K6, there isn't the need to reinvent the wheel. There is lots of high quality elementary student facing curricula that exist. I mean, lots of it, because fortunately elementary teachers tend to be more open to better pedagogy than us stubborn high school teachers. So then you can, I mean, a thought is your group could focus really more on that teacher facing piece. So here's we're going to start with this student. These people have already thought through how to build a student curriculum and thoughtfully done it. So now let's start from there and then figure out how do we need to support our teachers and provide that teacher facing piece, which I mean, it exists, but it's not, I mean, it's something where you would want to culture, you would want to tie in the culture. You would want to tie in the backgrounds of the different teachers you have in your community. Versus getting something off the shelf. I mean, this is to Callie's point in terms of like, there's certain critical thinking we know we want our kids to have, like regardless of whether they're in Bogota or Guatemala or in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Anyway, that's a thought.
Yeah, it actually makes me think a lot about, like, again, I'm going to reference this other project that I've worked on a lot because it was so intensely like curriculum based, but literally what we had the teachers doing was they were learning their curriculum by unpacking standards, determining how they're going to break down their standards, identifying what is it that they, like, their students would have to learn, and then them learning it like not that long before they were teaching it. It was like a matter of weeks, sometimes days. Like, it was a very fast turnaround. And not to say that that's like the ideal model. It was very much like building a plane while flying it, and let's try to figure it out. But it was due to that same piece of like their own experience in school was so limiting in how they thought about math and what their experiences had been, that they would like live it as a student and they'd turn around and then they teach it to their students that way. But the other thing that happens sometimes with that, or what our experience was at least, was that the students are like little sponges, and they're like their ability to adapt to that kind of thinking was almost, it was just like a lot faster than the teachers. Like, they would catch up to the teachers really quickly because the teachers had a hard time unlearning and relearning, whereas the students were more just had much less to unlearn and would just kind of like take off and learn it. And so that, I think, is something also to consider in this kind of just like thinking about the curriculum and that whole like different approach to it, because that's what happened. And like, it still is happening. And so it's just like something to think about when you're thinking about how that actually works and like how do you support the teachers in that
And
Right.
I mean, and this is where the cultural piece comes in, is how open are teachers to that? Because sometimes, like, it's, and again, I reference my experience. Teachers of older students tend to be a little more stubborn and less willing to acknowledge, like, hey, I may need to rethink how this math really developed in order to do it to my kids. And you do it very differently than you would with a group of teachers who are just thirsting like their students are. Like, all right, all I know is I can't help my kids get here. How do I need to do this? And they're willing to open up. And so it's where is the culture of the teachers, and how do I design that teacher-facing support in a way in which that the teacher's current practice is being honored? I mean, I'm sure, Amanda, you have a group of incredibly dedicated teachers who love their students and work their tails off for those kids. So how do we honor that practice in a way that they feel open, like, all right, yeah, okay, I'm good at what I do, but maybe there's a way I can be even better.
I think we shift the paradigm a bit. Instead of the teacher, like if we help teachers see that people who are exceptional at their craft learn along with their students, aren't the source of knowledge, then me not knowing is actually me being a better teacher. One of the best instructors I've ever seen is Arthur Powell. And he does not know a dang thing when he's teaching. He's constantly asking questions. I mean, he does, of course, he's asking questions to help. He does it better than anyone I've ever seen. And I think, if we help the teacher see that that's what a great teacher does, and your job is eventually to know what you're teaching, but right now just learn it with them and find marvel in that. That also opens you up to something that maybe you've never thought of. I've worked with kids still that I was in Galapagos with Steve Rasmussen, Arthur Powell, and Rick Scott, pretty strong mathematicians, especially Steve Rasmussen. And he just came, and Steve's this big, massive guy, bouncing out of a room going, oh my God, you'll never believe how they find the least common denominator. Showed, and then Rick's like, hold on, I don't understand. Can you do this again? This is a guy who's a genius in math learning. That's what we want to see our teachers do and get to. So what are the comments? Because I wanted to sort of make a bit of a shift to the fourth phase of this. Any other comments really quickly? Alex.
Yeah, so the only other thing I guess I would add with that and thinking about like La Puerta Abierta specifically also is like the profile of the teacher and like what you're saying about their openness to this kind of thing. For us, that actually like trumped anything else. It was like more important than their content knowledge, because what we were measuring was if the teachers were able to like adapt to this different way of thinking about things, and like if they were open to like learning it in a way, and also being uncomfortable, because I think that's one of the biggest pieces too, is like,
right,
if you look like you don't know, it's like now you're a bad teacher. Like that's how it's been. That's,
yes,
we've talked about the traditional, like if you don't have all the answers, then you're a bad teacher. Like that's what people think. And so to like be willing to challenge that is huge. But at the other piece, and I know we're not talking about like admin stuff today, but I think in LPA, similar to Maya, it's like they have control over those pieces where it's like you already have that built in. The admin is already there to support. They already are on board with this stuff. And so you can like go in and try out this stuff or use this other curriculum or use this other resource, and you're going to have that there too to support all these other factors. So I know it's come up in other learning labs, but I think that's like also a really key piece. It's like you can't have just the curriculum that works for your students. You have to have the other pieces too that are there, that are like to make it like the perfect combination of things, to make it like a space where teachers can grow and develop that way. So I guess it's like speaking more specifically to LPA, but just like thinking about that, you already have like a huge advantage with that, and that you already have that established. So I think this other piece is like something that can fit in a way that is harder for us to fit it in other schools that we work.
Teachers have to feel safe. I know Tim used to do workshops and they connected and discovering algebra and just discovering series. And even the work I did with teachers, if the teachers didn't feel safe, they're not going to take a risk. And I think Amanda's teachers feel ultimately safe. Such a great place for us to be thinking about this.
And I think something that leads to success often too is when the focus is on the students. Like, yes, we at T2T, we're a teacher facing organization. And so we're constantly thinking about what are teachers doing. And sometimes that can come, like, if we're not careful, when we're so focused on what are teachers doing in the classroom, what are teachers leading their students to, teachers, then teachers themselves can feel very under the spotlight, or like attacked or defensive, or like everything is about me and what I'm doing right or wrong, and it's me. But what we're really trying to get to is student-centered conversations for student-centered classrooms. And so when we're able to shift those conversations to what are students doing, what are students learning, what are students talking about and figuring out and working on, like, that's what also, teachers care about. And that's really where we can align, and where then all of a sudden the pressure is off of the teacher as like, I'm the one who has to have it all figured out, to what are my students doing? And then it's almost like a puzzle of like, now what do I need to do to get my students to this place where I agree that they should be, because, especially if they've been a part of the process and you've been able to align around what you want for students, then it, like, when the focus is on them, it takes the pressure off of the teacher in a way that can create so much like stress and anxiety sometimes. And when really at the end of the day, what we're looking for is student learning. And our belief as an organization is that teacher actions lead to student learning.
Right.
Sometimes if we can shift that conversation and to the student actions, and then like the teacher, then the teachers are like the tail of that, and so they're able to think about, well, what did I do that led to my students doing this? Or my students weren't doing this and I want them to do this. So now what do I need to do to get there? And it just like shifts the dynamics a lot.
Yeah. Interesting, because that's good that you say that, because you're setting up sort of the last bit to me. I'm just throwing this out there. Tell me if you guys disagree, but and it's fine. But I almost feel like there are like four questions we're answering. The first is why are we doing this? Like, what are the standards? Why do the kids? That's almost a what too, but it's sort of a why are they learning these things maybe? And then what is it that we're teaching? That to me is almost the curriculum kind of thing. How are we teaching them is the lesson plans, and the curriculum sort of fits in that how as well. So there's like a why, a what, a how. And then the other thing is sort of how do we know that it's successful? How do we monitor it and keep up? And in the chapter, I read a lot that the teachers should have ultimate responsibility. I have to adapt to my students. I have to be aware where they are. And so how do you find the balance between allowing the teacher to respond to her or his students and pushing the group forward, and also accountability? Where does accountability lie when you're giving the responsibility to the teachers? This is an answer. I know Amanda has the answer, but she's going to let Tim answer first.
Oh.
I mean, we maybe don't know. That's a hard question to me, but I think it's an important one. The book would say, let the teachers respond to their students. But like when I was in 8th grade, teaching 8th grade, my students barely knew what a fraction was. And I was supposed to be teaching them algebra. So if I truly responded to my students, I'd be teaching 4th grade math. And that would work.
I don't know if I'd buy that. I mean, yes, it happens, right? We all know our students come with, to be charitable, an uneven sense of mathematical experience. I'm not even talking about aptitude. I'm literally using the word experiences, mathematical experiences. But I mean, one thing we talk about back in my training days is not that you still teach your course, and then you bring up those, rather than the traditional way to do it is like, if you look at a traditional math textbook, the first 3 or 4 chapters are all reteaching what they should have learned the year before. So you spend a third half of the year redoing the previous grade, because remember, it's always the teacher's fault from the previous year. We had that conversation already.
Right.
And then if you have time, you get into new stuff. The research supports this idea that not that you're not going to teach fractions to those 8th graders because it was covered in 3rd grade, but you teach it as they need that skill to do what they're doing today. So I'm going to do proportional reasoning, which is an 8th grade topic. And in proportional reasoning, you're going to figure out, wow, these kids really don't have a sense of the relationship between numerator and denominator yet. And so now I'm going to infuse that sense of remediation within, so I'm still teaching 8th grade math.
Mm-hmm.
All right, it's going to take a little longer because I'm going to infuse that piece of remediation. NCTM's latest document talks more about the idea of is not so much to teach, is to allow more time. So don't stop teaching 8th grade math. Maybe you have to decide as a community, we're going to have our students or a set of our students who are going to do an extra math period or something like that, to have that. But those skills, if you want them to remember them, they need to be infused within doing something new. Plus, there's a psychology to the student as well. They realize that you're teaching long division for the 4th time.
Yeah.
And you get A, there's a sense of I'm bored, but then B, there's a sense of like, okay, I'm obviously not a good at math person, so I'm just going to bail.
Good point. Good point.
And give up.
Amanda, can you elaborate on your good statement, your good comment here?
Sure. Okay, so I think that this is a really good question, and I think that there is an ideal answer that might not be a realistic answer in most school environments. So I think ideally you would have teachers, ideally they would be capable of teaching, but if they weren't, there would be a partnership that would be available for them. So that there would be administrators or a math coach that would be providing feedback and observation for the teachers, or if a teacher had a complication with teaching a theme or reaching out to a child who wasn't able to learn, that there would be resources available for both the teacher and the student. So again, I know that that's ideal, but I think your question of like allowing the teachers to have autonomy of their plans and their curriculum, theoretically, that's lovely. You know, you would hope that all teachers would be qualified to be able to make good decisions for their students. And yet, I think that, as we've all been talking about, teachers are still in their process of learning as well.
Right.
So taking that into consideration, at least with the teachers at the Puerta Abierta, if we were to be giving autonomy to our teachers, I would hope that as well we had either a math coach or somebody with more knowledge of what we were trying to accomplish to be able to give feedback to the teachers and accompany them.
Yes, I love if you're able to do the math coach, and the willingness to do that would be, I think, fantastic. So
I would say it's less about autonomy. It's more just about ensuring that teachers have an honored and heard and respected voice in the process. I mean, so I've done this for a few years. I still, as a teacher, go to meetings, and I have administrators and leaders at my school that I have to choose to trust. Like, yes, I want my voice to be heard. I want to be part of the conversation. But at the end of the day, the community through our leadership have to make that decision. So I'm not a big fan of total autonomy. I'm a big fan of making sure that I'm honored and heard. But I mean, that goes to that whole horizontal vertical thing that we talked about earlier. I need to teach within the confines of a community, which means I have a voice, so do you, so does the person who has to support the parents and support the broader community.
it's treating the teacher like a professional, because I think it is a craft, it is a profession. It's not just a job.
And it reminds me too of like, this is where the importance of standards comes in, and where teachers have flexibility is in, okay, what route do my students need to take to get here to this standard, and where curriculum can support is in helping lay out the learning trajectory necessary, but then I can use my evidence of student thinking to guide my students there, you know, to decide, okay, these are the tasks that we need to focus on first, and then how they respond to that is going to inform the next steps that I take. But as the teacher, if I'm really like following these principles that come from this book, you know, then I should be able to explain to my administration or anyone, like, this is where my students are in their thinking, and this is where they need to go. And so this is why I am following the steps that I'm doing. Now, in reality, even when I was a classroom teacher, I didn't always have that. I've learned a lot in the last several years when I've had the time to really dig into things that I didn't learn in, in school or in my professional developments, my first several years teaching. But I think about that too, like the kind of autonomy, flexibility within a framework that ensures, like, there's a question here about equity, that ensures equity, because if I don't have a framework of saying everyone is capable of achieving this, then I'm making the decisions of what they're capable of, and I could be completely wrong, and I've been kind of I've seen both ends. When I taught in the Dominican Republic, our school didn't have standards at all. And our teachers really realized, something's not working because there was no connection between grade levels. People just kind of did whatever they wanted. And so then that was really when I realized, like, okay, it's nice to have a little more flexibility, but too much flexibility isn't really leading to positive outcomes for our students in the long run. But then I've also seen the opposite end of that with, like, some charter schools in New York City that make teachers follow a script.
Yes.
And that, they can't veer from that script. And so then, like, why am I there? Like, what, that's not also providing any, I don't know, I could go on a different.
Yeah, that's a soapbox, man. We can all get on that one.
It's about honoring and being heard, though. Like, why? Like, I remember that New York program, and the reason, because the teachers felt they had no voice in that decision, that this was mandated from above, and it was not a community-based decision. Hey, we want an authentic curriculum across the board, so here's how we're going to do it. They were told, and no one likes to be told. I mean, none of you guys like to be told. I know your boss, and no, you don't want him to be telling you. All right, actually, you want to feel like. Her, that's true. Thank God. You want her.
You're both my boss. Bosses.
Anyway, point being, you want to feel like you had a voice. So you know what? If those now New York City is a huge district, so that's probably not a great example. But if you're talking about a small school, like where you're dealing with a manageable number of teachers, if the teachers felt like their voice was heard and honored in that decision, like, hey, we're all going to do this way to make sure that we have consistency, then you'll have more success than the various, especially in the large urbans, when they try to go top down, it rarely works. It's almost always an unmitigated disaster. But some vendor always makes a lot of money off of it.
Yeah, anyway. That's helpful. So that's good. We have like 10 minutes left that I'd like to we're just going to solve the problems for everyone in this last 10 minutes. But I do want to come. I think it's a good. I feel like personally, after reading this chapter and having this discussion, I have a little bit of a direction. I feel like, I'm not sure if you feel that way a little bit, Amanda, but I feel like we wouldn't be just shooting in the dark trying to figure things out. But I want to preface that by saying two things that we talked about. Callie mentioned even the Common Core standards and how much you enjoyed working with those at the elementary grade. And Tim Pope is connected to the people that wrote the Common Core and have the curriculum. I think they finished the elementary curriculum now, haven't they, Tim?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know what happened to Sara. Maybe I drove her off.
She had a meeting at 5.
Oh, okay. One thing to look at in terms of your research is Illustrative Mathematics, which was the curriculum written by the team that helped write the Common Core. A, it's free, and B, it's going to be translated into Spanish. So then you're just locally having to print it. You can download it and print it locally. I know it's one of the things we're looking at doing even down here in Bogota, is using that, because we can download it and print it here locally and not deal with the whole cost of international stuff. So the whole thing's going to get translated into Spanish eventually, because California is going to drive them to get the money to do it. And then including, now I don't know, I know for the middle school, for grade 6, they hired, because I've met the guy down here because he's a Colombian, they hired someone to wrote not only the student materials, but the teacher materials in Spanish. And like I said, it's all online and free. And I know that K5 is done. I don't know if the Spanish is done yet. Honestly, it's been a little while since I talked to those guys. And I would assume they're going to translate the Spanish teacher materials as well, because California pretty much requires it. So I would assume that's in their plan. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's a good starting point. It's quality. It's I mean, a lot of the headaches in terms of the challenges that you talk about in this chapter, they took care of for you. Now, that also means that you agree, like Callie was talking about, well, the Common Core, those are like, you have to decide you want to buy into that first. If you buy into that, then the illustrative stuff is a good place to start. It's not like, I mean, it's not, you can do it off the shelf. I doubt you would do that. I would think your community, want to talk about making it even more relevant to your local community, you would take that time. But at least you're not having to reinvent the wheel, and you're not having to worry about, like you said, Amanda, your math isn't your world's favorite thing. You don't have to worry about the technical part. Like, all right, they took care of that thinking about the progression. You can just think of like, all right, how am I going to make this work for my community?
Right.
Would be a place to start.
That's right. And then Sara is very well connected with Origo Math, and we have actually talked to the CEO of Origo, the founder, about working in your community with your school, Amanda. So that's on their radar, and if it worked out, it's available for free. It'd be for free for you, and they may even eventually at some point bring trainers down. I'm not sure what's happening with that program that was pre-COVID and pre him being stuck in Australia. But that's there.
So if you could speak briefly, Tim, Chad, or anyone else on this conversation, like what would be the differences, or what should I be looking for if we are choosing a curriculum for the Puerta Abierta? So, we've talked about Common Core, which is connected to Illustrative Mathematics, and then what you just mentioned, Orgo. And so if I were trying to decide what would be a good fit, what am I looking for?
Can I say something first, Tim, and then you do?
Yeah, I was going to say,
you'll outdo me no matter what.
Right.
And Amanda, I'll share, if you're interested, I'll share the whole book that this chapter came from. It's a pretty easy read, but one thing that almost every chapter, they have these things called best practices that we've been talking through. And almost every chapter says role of the student and role of the teacher in this. And the role of the teacher is really to provide access to something that's going to help build knowledge. The student's job is to think, to offer lots of opportunity or ideas, to come up with multiple solutions, to tell the teacher if they don't understand, to understand what they're supposed to be learning. The teacher's job is to communicate with the teacher what they're supposed to be doing, to provide a meaningful task. So first of all, I would say, are the students required to think, and are they responsible for their learning, or is it the teacher? You want something that the kids are going to build their knowledge.
I'm going to walk you back a step to what we
Okay.
talked about at the beginning of this conversation. So again, this is just my opinion. Ignore it for what I tell Allie and Chad this all the time. They keep calling me and asking my opinion on things, and I'm never short of an answer. But I'm like, you can ignore it. It's all. Step one: have that conversation about what you want your sixth graders to look like.
That's true.
Mathematically when they leave.
Yeah.
Step one. From that, have a sense of this is what we want to accomplish. Now, I happen to agree with Callie in that sense that I think a lot of what you're going to come up with jives well with the Common Core's goals. And when you look at the Common Core, I wouldn't look at the mathematical standards, but look at the overview, the preface part, where they articulate this is why these standards exist, and see how that matches up with what your community said you wanted out of your sixth graders when they leave your school. If in fact that you say, hey, this is a match, this is where we want to be, then you go to what Chad was saying, because everything Chad said I agree with, but I think you got to do that part first. And then you're looking for, and this goes back to how do you make it work for your community? You want kids engaged with a task, and part of engaging with a task is having culturally based, whether it's your culture or learning about other cultures, culturally based activities. Part of it is, the number one question I ask myself at the end of every class I teach, how much thinking did I do and how much thinking did my kids do? Yeah. So is this curriculum supporting my kids' thinking, or is this supporting the teacher's thinking? I feel good about myself when I do all the thinking, because I'm like, oh, look, I know pre-calculus, but I don't know how well, I don't know if that did squat for the kids. Made me feel better about myself. But anyway, so that would be the first step, decide what your goals are. Second step, decide like, all right, how do we find a curriculum? And like I said a little while ago, at least in English in the States, there's lots of good stuff out there. I bring up Illustrative because A, I know it's translated, and B, I know it's free. So that's like a place to start. And I know that TBT has a relationship with Origo, and so that's probably another one. I'm assuming they've translated at least their student materials as well, because they sell into those states as well. So you have some choices, but fundamentally what I would say is come up with your goals, and then as a teacher community, before you even look at a book, is come up with your list of, well, what do you want your classroom to look like? What do you want kids to be doing? And then create your rubric, or rubric's a fancy word, but basically your checklist of when you're looking at materials, what do you want? And acknowledge what teachers need as well. Like teachers, I mean, I have all the admiration in the world for those of you. I guess, Callie, you were an elementary teacher. I seriously have all the admiration in the world for elementary teachers, because all I have to worry about is math. Like those of you who have to worry about all the subjects, it just blows me away. Like I could never think that hard about that many subject areas. It would give me a headache. So the fact that you can pull it off, so like you want something, and whether it's T2T supporting you in this, or getting a curriculum that has that teacher facing piece so teachers feel comfortable, like this isn't this overwhelming thing I'm going to take on. But that's I don't know. I mean, that was a very long answer. Step one.
This is exactly why you're here, Tim, though. I mean, Tim used to sell these. This is his, he's literally talking to the school district right now, because I've heard you said that before. So is that answer your question, Amanda? No, it's good. I think it's great. Yeah, because in fact, that was sort of the thing what he said. I mean, as I think about the process, because that was going to be the next question, and you asked the question for me. We do want to know what you want to teach, and what do you want your kids to look like, and then we want to match it. I do, well, people at home teach like student-centered at home. I'm sure they would want to do that in the math classroom, and so then we look into that. And it's notoriously difficult, I think, to find really good student-centered elementary curriculum. So it's hard to teach.
I agree with Tim, though. It's growing. Like there's a curriculum that is in Spanish, and it's in a lot of languages, actually, though. It's like the Eureka Math from Great Minds. Mm-hmm. And while there's a lot of it, like, it's not always super engaging, and I don't like the way that they do fluency sometimes, it does really support a growth of conceptual understanding, and it is like built with the coherence and focus in mind. That is which are two of the major shifts when the US moved to Common Core math. And so like those are things that you can see through there. And like I can look at that and see, okay, here's an application problem that's really rich. The context, my kids won't connect to it all. So I just totally change the context to something that's relevant for them. But the learning progressions and the application of the math is there. And it creates a guide for me to also help myself see like what is it what might be the steps needed? And then what are the entry points for my students? And then how can I gauge like where to drive my instruction based on that?
And that's another free one. I mean, another one I didn't mention, there's one called Bridges. And I didn't mention it because it's owned by a nonprofit and they tend to have a pretty hefty price tag on their stuff, but it's really good in terms of accomplishing those goals, Chad, that you're articulating. So there is some stuff out there. Again, it's looking at being both practical and pedagogical in terms of how to meet your needs. I mean, because we live in the real world. There's budgets involved too. There's budgets and practical things, and how do you make sure your teachers are prepared and trained for whatever you're going to implement, and make sure they have that support. And there's all those pieces that are part of that holistic puzzle.
Yeah, makes sense.
I'm excited that Illustrative Math is now available for elementary. We used it at middle school when I was an instructional coach, but and my school was piloting it, but it wasn't available for elementary.
So they're finishing the pilot right now. It's going to be the broad launches for next. So it's done. There's schools doing the full pilot right now, and then it's going to be available for broad release this summer for everyone to pick up and use. And like I said, don't hold me to it. It's an assumption the Spanish is going to be done when the English is done. Because it's been a year and a half now since I was there full time. Wow. Sorry, Amanda. I used to work for Illustrative too, so I have total bias on this. So.
Yeah, that's good. Well, any other questions or thoughts, or how are you feeling, Amanda? Do you feel a little bit like you have a conception of what's happening now and where to go, next steps?
I do. I feel excited, actually. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, now we can move forward. Yeah, I think I'm just very grateful that you included me in this conversation, because I think that at first glance, we do confuse standards and curriculum often, or use them interchangeably. And I also feel that, again, like this idea of creating a curriculum for the Puerta Abierta feels really, really overwhelming. However, I feel as well, after having this conversation, understanding that there are models that we can use, that we don't have to recreate, or create, because we aren't even recreating, we would just be creating a new curriculum. But there are things that we can use to guide us. Is reassuring, and I really good. And I mean, some of us have talked, and I'll be talking with Alex a little bit more tomorrow. We do have somebody in mind for a math coach who's a current teacher, but maybe thinking this year that she could be in the process of learning about being a math coach to really enter into that position next year. It's exciting. It feels like very serendipitous.
That's wonderful. Yeah, and we don't have to rush through this. Let's do it right. And then so that we can also provide a model for other people and share our work. Yeah, that's excellent. Excellent. Thank you, guys. Kelly,
Amanda, can I just say one thing? Amanda, thank you so much for joining this conversation. I have just heard so many amazing things about this partnership, and I have really enjoyed listening to this conversation, your perspective, and I'm really excited to see where this goes. But I think this is just representative of kind of what it looks like to work in partnership authentically. And so hopefully, more good things to come. But thanks for your time and your partnership.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. I appreciate your words. And this is, well, it's definitely been more fun than what I imagined, and talking about math curriculum.
Yeah.
But I always love talking about education, and especially creative education and equity in education. So this was very fueling for my thoughts.
Excellent. Well, I do want to tell you, not now, but maybe we'll get together again, and I'm going to tell you about this thing I'm doing for how to take storybooks and turn them into mathematical activities, just to model that. We actually might end up doing that a little bit in a couple of sessions, like 4 weeks from now. You might be invited. I'll invite you for that as well. And Tim, you have seen her school, her original school, because when we were in Santiago Atitlan, we drove right by it. Tim went to Guatemala with me and was in Santiago Atitlan and in Shela. So
yes, my one lasting memory of that experience was when that fourth grader schooled me in checkers. No one told me he was like the,
totally nailed you. Yep.
He was like the school champion, and so I'm sitting here thinking I'm having this. And they all surrounded us and loved watching this fourth grader because the rules are different in Guatemala, and no one told me that. I will stand by that excuse. Amanda, I look forward. I know my wife and I, once this COVID thing goes down, we both we really want to come. We want to go to language school in Guatemala. It's on our list. We're just waiting for things to clear up, so that maybe I can be a little more conversant with my new neighbors.
Great. I would like that. You're welcome to come.
Thank you, guys. Hey, Kelly, you're going to stick around for about 3 minutes or 5. Okay. Thanks.
Bye, guys.
See y'all. I'll stop recording now.